All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have probably one of the more influential folks in the AAPI tech community around, Dave Liu. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
Yeah, I always enjoy your LinkedIn stuff. You're you're one of the few people who's been really outspoken, I think, about a lot of topics that are of interest to the AAPI community. Before we get into that, I'm sure we'll hit the bamboo ceiling, but would love to kind of get a little background about yourself so folks who don't know you can kind of understand where you're coming from a little better.
Yeah. And this will lead nicely into the PM part of my life. But so I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in New York. Parents immigrated from Taiwan, and grew up in Princeton area before going to Penn to study finance at Wharton. And then I became a consultant out in San Francisco for Deloitte. So I was a consultant for all of a year before I realized I hated that. And I became a PM at Yahoo Finance. So I joined Yahoo in 99. I was, a couple of years in. And so we were under 1,000 employees, and Jerry Yang sat around the corner from me. And it was an amazing experience. It was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. And just a team that was there went on to do great things. And this was when, and still people still use Yahoo Finance every day, but we were just starting and getting going, and it was great. From there, I moved back to the East Coast. My dad passed away, so I moved back to take care of my mom. Joined Sony in New York. This was after September 11th, and then worked there in kind of BD, and then got into Stanford for business school. So I came back out west again to the Bay. I got my MBA from Stanford. Worked at Apple and eBay, and was doing product strategy for eBay when I decided to quit and join a startup in the city. Was doing product marketing for a company called Flip that was the Flip camcorders, if you remember those.
Yeah, I remember those.
That got acquired by Cisco. This was before cell phones had cameras on them.
Yeah.
And got acquired by Cisco, and then I decided to start my own company, my first company called FanPop. I did that for about 9 years before starting a second company, Paired, which was a labor marketplace for restaurants, with a friend who was he was a Stanford alum, a Filipino-American Stanford alum who was he was pre-med, and he ended up going into culinary school, and he went to go cook for Thomas Keller at Per Se before joining French Laundry. And then we started this kind of restaurant labor marketplace after he had built his own restaurant chain. And we wanted to solve a big problem for that industry. But yeah, so that's kind of the story of how I got in, the path to where I am now. Well, not completely, but I did end up going to venture capital. But that's kind of another next chapter story I can share too. If you want me to get into that too.
Yeah. How did you transition from being an operator and entrepreneur?
So that was completely accidental, honestly. It was I had started an Asian American founders community back in 2011 because I felt like coming out of college, when you go to schools like Penn and other places, when you go to university, there's a fragmentation of Asians. Like there's Chinese Students Association, Korean Students Association, Hong Kong Students Association, Filipino Students Association, and it was just like when you get out of school and when you're a founder, you see some of the communities have really strong founder communities. The Jewish community, the Indian IIT alumni community, all these other folks. But for kind of East Asian Americans and Southeast Asian Americans, we didn't really have that because we were so fragmented. And, I'm a firm believer that without a strong network, you can't succeed, because that's how you meet investors, how you meet new hires, how you meet the best lawyers, whatever it is, customers. You need a strong network, and we just didn't have that benefit. And so I started to grow one myself. Got together 8 founders for dinner, and that grew to about 200 or so by the pandemic. And that was when the pandemic happened. We had been getting together for a while, and this includes founders like Tony Xu from DoorDash and Eric Yuan from Zoom, people who've done really well. And I saw, this amazing dynamic of experienced founders helping out younger, newer founders who were pre-seed, seed, early stage. And it was great. But then the pandemic happened, and a lot of companies were struggling to raise capital during that time because a lot of the investors were not investing via Zoom. They only invested in their circles, and so that meant a lot of people who were outside those circles weren't getting any venture, capital. So I decided to say, well, how can I help these companies out? Maybe I can pool and syndicate using AngelList, 2 or 3 checks for a few $100,000 each, and help out, bridge the gap through the pandemic for a couple founders at least. And I wrote an essay for the group of 200 founders, and it was meant to, recruit anyone who wanted to raise money or anyone who wanted to angel invest and help out. And in the essay, I talked about how Tony and I went to an Ascend. It's like an executive nonprofit for Asian American executives. And they shared a lot of data about Silicon Valley and how, 50-some% of the employees are Asian, but only like 19-20% are executives. It was, very discouraging, but more so was the seeing that their white colleagues were 400% more likely to be promoted than they were. And that was even more discouraging. So I think the 2 companies I saw that were actually at parity for Asian employees being promoted were NVIDIA and Pinterest, both founded by Asian Americans. So So in the essay I wrote about, hey, this is, rather than banging our heads against the bamboo ceiling, why don't we just build our own houses? And so that was kind of the beginning of Hyphen Capital. And it was just an essay for the group, but one of the members of the group actually shared it publicly. I didn't say you couldn't share it publicly, but when she did, she has over 100,000 followers, and she was, pretty influential. And so I was not expecting it to be kind of broadly broadcast. And I thought, wow, I can either, in the immigrant scarcity mindset I have and kind of self-preservation mode of being an Asian American and not causing too much, ruffling feathers or anything. I thought, oh, maybe I should, delete this because this wasn't meant to be public. I think in all honesty, I thought, oh, I might get canceled because Black and Hispanic founders could say, hey, Asians, you have all the tech jobs, you have all the, VC jobs, you guys are rich, you guys don't need this, we need it more than you do, which is completely valid. They need funding much more than any other communities. But on the flip side, if I was a white male investor and I saw this, I think, oh, if I wrote something like this, I'd be called a racist. So, it was very delicate. But then during that time is when I was basically, it was during COVID, after George Floyd. I've been very vocal about Black Lives Matter and supporting, the Black community. And, I grew up with a lot of Black friends, and I know what, historically what they've gone through and how challenging it is. And so I was able to speak up for them, but when it came time to speak up for our community, it became like I don't know if we're supposed to. It's almost like we're not supposed to complain kind of thing. Don't have it fine. Just everything's like don't say anything. And so that's when I realized, like, well, if I can speak up for another community, like how can I not speak up for my own? And so that's when I just decided to lean in. I wrote an essay about how as Asian founders, we don't have trust funds to fall back on. We have to take a huge risk. Our parents are not supportive of us. They didn't sacrifice everything for us to go to like Harvard and MIT and work at Google and Goldman Sachs, to quit our jobs to start some no-name company they never heard of and can't brag to their friends about. So they still tell their friends that they work at Google and Goldman. And we don't have, we're still paying school loans, many of us, paying our rent, and we don't have a rich uncle that's going to just bail us out and give us a private equity job if it doesn't work out or whatnot. So it's a big deal to get that first check. And so I wrote that on LinkedIn, on a LinkedIn post and a Twitter thread, and I ended up getting 1 million views on LinkedIn. And it got 1,000 people who were interested in investing, from hedge fund managers to engineers to surgeons to law partners.
Wow.
I have an assistant coach with Orlando Magic, all sorts of folks who wanted to support, this mission. And from wanting to just help out 2 or 3 founders with a few $100,000 each, I end up investing $30 million in 90 plus founders, and 90 plus companies with Asian founders, 50% with women founders, when women usually get 2% of venture capital funding. So for me, it was kind of a wake up call of, don't ask for permission or wait for something to be given to you, just go out and take it. And so that was kind of a eye-opening experience for me, because if that friend hadn't shared the essay publicly, I don't know that I would have been doing this. It was literally just a side thing to help out a few people.
Yeah.
So it's funny how things happen. And so, I mean, I know the pandemic and COVID was a terrible thing, but there was a silver lining that pushed a lot of people into places that they wouldn't have expected to.
So is the plan to raise many subsequent funds for Hyphen, or how do
Yeah.
you see it going?
So that was all syndicated deals, all SPVs
Mhm.
to all those companies, individual deals. And then during 22 and 23, where it was harder to kind of get liquidity and people couldn't invest as aggressively and less dry powder into SPVs, I still had a lot of inbounds from a lot of founders. And
Mhm.
especially because of COVID, a lot of people were able to work remotely and experiment on the side. And these were all the kind of the Asian worker bees at different companies,
Mhm.
whether it be law firms or, startups or medical practices, whatever. They had ideas and they were really smart and they knew what exactly needed to be done. So I decided, well, I would be able to help all these folks. So I decided to raise a proper institutional venture fund. And so I'm on fund one now, small, early stage, targeted only,
Mhm.
pre-seed seed companies. But yeah, that's what I'm doing full time now. So it was kind of this circuitous route that ended up here. But in a way, it's kind of, I realized that it was my calling and is what it was meant to, do. My superpower is my network, and I'm able to help a lot of these founders out. So yeah, that the content you see on LinkedIn is me just writing about the things I care about and the things I see, and it thankfully it resonates with a lot of people too.
I love it. How has it been transitioning from founder, product person to now, capital allocator of an institutional fund? What's that been like for you?
I think for me, I enjoy mentoring, and I think the one thing I've seen as I've gotten older is that, a lot of people notice like when you're young, you can grind it out and you have hours and you're working nonstop. But when you're older, you're quicker to see patterns and you can
Mhm.
identify things faster than you were when you were younger. I think that helps. That's why a lot of people, become mentors and coaches. But for me, it's been leveraging my experience and what I've, raising, venture. We raised about $30 million for my startup, and it's like going through that process to a Series B. Um, just coaching folks through that, because a lot of Asian founders, there's a lot of kind of self-doubt or kind of playing themselves down in other ways that hurt us if you try to when you're
Mhm.
fundraising. The storytelling needs work and other areas that I can help out with. But in a lot of ways, it's almost like, you do end up being somewhat of a therapist for these founders too, because they go through a lot of stuff. And being a founder is there's a lot of dark times. It's like everyone thinks it's all glamorous, but it's some horrible stuff that you have to go through. And so I think having someone who's been there before to understand and empathize with it, and sympathize with it, is actually really powerful. And it's, I enjoy I've always enjoyed kind of looking at different markets and industries. Prior to the stuff I've been writing now, I used to write a lot about marketplaces, two-sided marketplaces and things. So, I love thinking about those problems, and apply to different industries. I've done consumer company, I've done enterprise, SMB. So I've seen a little bit of all of it. And for me, it's nice to be able to kind of problem solve in different areas, but also just encourage these founders, because a lot of them, they're very capable. I think they just need that kind of that encouragement and push that they haven't always gotten.
Yeah. I mean, Dave, I can't help but ask you, what's your take on the current market conditions? What are you most excited about in terms of new areas of opportunity for ventures?
Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting. I feel like the AI boom has obviously taken over everything, but it's also, I think it's because it's so flooded. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot
Mhm.
of kind of wrappers that people are investing in that don't have that much advantage. I think I'm honestly interested more in seeing how, because in a lot of ways, like things like Perplexity and other products that actually, great AI tools, but it's more about the UX and delivery of the feature that
Mhm.
people get, like that enjoy using, that'll make the difference. Because if people aren't going to, it doesn't matter how good your, language model is, or, whatever it might be. But I think if everyone can do the same RAG software and other things to pull out, answer questions and answers, it's not differentiated enough. I think the experience is very critical, and it's always been the case.
Mhm.
The UX is key. Like things like Tinder and Snapchat and other things were all about UX. There were other dating sites out there. There were other social camera
Mhm.
video sites out, like apps out there. But at the end of the day, if you can't find a way that gets people kind of using it regularly, it doesn't matter. And so, like one company I invested in prior through the SPVs where it was After Hour, and Kevin Shu. It's basically it's an investing social app for retail investors, but
Mhm.
they verify your accounts, your Fidelity accounts, your Schwab accounts,
Mhm.
your and brokerage accounts, so that a lot of these Reddit threads, you just kind of can say, oh, I bought tons of this stock or I sold lots
Mhm.
of this now, but I'm like, well, did you really? Or are you kind of, so this verifies that, but the UX is extremely kind of like addictive for a lot of people. And I think that's what gets people engaged, is come back and keep relying on that. Because as someone who built Yahoo Finance, we knew that. We knew what to, how to get people hooked. So I think the design is very, very important, and the usability of something is very important. It's not just the quality of the answers. If no one ever types in a question, it doesn't matter how good your answers are. So the experience is very critical. But at the end of the day, it's still, I think there are a lot of undervalued or companies that are getting less attention that aren't core AI
Mhm.
solutions. And I think those still are very viable. Right now, consumers not getting any love, but you know, consumers are still out there. Like the next, Airbnb or Uber, there
Mhm.
is other solutions out there that people are just glossing over because they don't use, their core is not based around AI. So I think there are some gems out there that people aren't paying attention to.
Yeah, Dave, as an individual, in addition to After Hours, are there certain tools or products that you use that you find are game changers? Aside from ChatGPT and similar. You
Yeah,
mentioned Perplexity. Are you a big Perplexity user? Or
I play with it quite a bit, but I mean, honestly, like some of the things I use on the day to day, even just like something like Granola is, I
Mhm.
don't know if you've seen that, but it's basically it records like any of my calls. It takes
Yeah,
not just note takes, but actually, if you kind of write a small little a sentence on like focus on this, it pulls in the notes around that topic. Like if you said something that's of interest, I
yeah,
just type in 2 words and it'll focus all my notes on that. So it kind of is a much smarter note taker.
yeah.
But things like that, there are plenty of tools out there that record and transcribe and whatnot. But I think when it comes to being efficient with meetings and whatnot, that's been a really useful tool for me. But yeah, I mean, I think there are everyday tools. Like I use Vimcal. I'm an investor in Vimcal, the calendaring app, and they sprinkled in AI throughout to make it much more useful as a calendar user and
Mm.
scheduling. And so I think you know rather than just core AI, what is the usability on the day to day, and then how do you improve that using the AI tools? And so yeah, I mean, I think for me, finding more efficiency in the tools I use every day is really helpful.
Yeah, it's just so interesting because you would think by now, after years of hundreds of billions of dollars poured into AI, there would be more Airbnb, Uber like kind of like transformational consumer products out there. I mean, aside from ChatGPT, that one I don't use Google search nearly as much.
Yes. Yeah.
Aside from that, I don't have that many where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they
Yeah.
used to do it that way.
Yeah. And I think that's gonna take time because until their AI is able to actually book things for you and transact for
Mhm.
you, and we're still a little bit of ways away from that, but and compute's going to be expensive when you start adding all that in there.
Mhm.
So I think as prices come down for compute, and they're able to actually execute and transact for you, it's I mean, I think right now it's saving time because it's grabbing information and research for you, and it's pulling data from elsewhere. So it's you get a get a quick summary answer. I can create an
Mhm.
itinerary, whatnot. But it's more of a time saver from you manually having to go grab this stuff versus a game changing, I changed my life, how I travel now, and I
Yeah.
use stay in Airbnbs, right? So I think it's just making a lot of companies probably a lot more efficient in a lot of ways, but it's not necessarily a new marketplace or service that's going to replace things I do so far. I mean, it there's companies that I've looked at that are, oh, it saves you time from, shopping for furniture because it'll look at interior design things and whatnot, or it looks at, it's pulling together, research data for investment research and pulling things like that from reports. But at the end of the day, I'm like, again, it's maybe saving you money from paying someone, an analyst, to do something, or you going out yourself to do it. But it's not creating a whole new platform or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. That will be a huge step change when we can move from tell me to do it for me.
Yeah.
Because I've been using ChatGPT for a bunch of travel planning. I've got a trip, college trip with my son coming up, and it's great. But I still have to go to Expedia and book all the
Yeah, exactly.
and then if I change it, then I got to go call the hotel and update all that crap. Like if it could just do that grunt work for me, my God, that would. Now we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be huge. And there's security issues of, okay, well, now AI has my credit card, so is it going to go nuts on booking things for me? So there's going to be security and privacy issues that have to be figured out too. But I mean, I have no doubt that we'll get there in a few years.
Yeah. I still remember in '99 when people were like, "Oh, will shoppers be willing to give their credit card to a website to buy something?"
Yeah,
that was like an open question.
No, totally. On our swiping on our phones, and it's there, and it's all over the place on our watches and whatnot.
Yeah. Now it's like no problem, just take it.
I think we'll definitely get there. Everyone's gonna be comfortable with it.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about, Dave, you mentioned the ceiling that people hit.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've observed is I got to hand it to the South Asian American community. You look at Google and Microsoft, and not just the CEO level, but
IBM.
they're doing all right.
Yeah.
What can the AAPI community learn from that, or is any of what are we not getting?
No, I mean, look, they're also AAPI. They're the South Asian, I think, community, specifically the men, have done exceedingly well. I think there are cultural, differences between East Asian communities that are very kind of Confucianistic, like we a lot of filial piety, respecting elders, respecting, a lot of boundaries and rules that we abide by, the way how we're supposed to behave. I think a lot of South Asian men who've been their moms, they treat them very well, and they feel very they feel like they can do anything. They're very emboldened by that. First, the language a barrier also, like the English is our first language. For a lot of our families, it wasn't the case. So even if you come from India and you have an accent, they don't see it as any, like they have an accent. They're just like, English is my primary language. My English is my first language, so I don't know what you are hearing, but I'm very versed and speak very well in English, fluently in English. But it's also that we're afraid of conflict and kind of confrontation in East Asian cultures. We try to avoid it to maintain peace and whatnot. But in South Asian cultures, that's not necessarily the case. They don't see it as a bad thing. I often joke, it's like being an East Coast guy in the West Coast. West Coast, people don't like confrontation. They try to avoid it. They're like, oh, it's all good, everything's fine, don't worry about it. But East Coast people, they think we're abrasive when we're just we say it like it is, and we're very upfront about things. I think it's very similar to that. So I think a lot of kind of South Asian men are more bold in terms of confrontation, but also saying what needs to be said. Whereas a lot of East Asians don't necessarily do that, and they're also, I think, they're willing to help each other a lot more. And kind of they have that. If you're an IIT alum, there's a strong camaraderie among that crew. But I think it's just there's a lot of cultural differences between kind of the East Asian and South Asian cultures that Jackson Liu, a professor at MIT, has done a lot of research about this, and the first thing was English. The English language being their primary language is very helpful, and then two, um, they're more willing to kind of socialize with outside of their group. So for a lot of East Asians, we tend to hang out with mostly East Asians, and then
Mhm.
South Asian folks are willing to hang out with other people. So if you don't build relationships outside of your your group, then you're not really going to be able to cross over. So this is why in the workplace, someone like Sundar or anyone else, they've built those ties. Like I said, networking is everything. They've built trust and ties with people who are in the executive, groups, committees, and the board and other people. And so, if you don't do that, you're never going to be considered for those roles. So I think it's very much a cultural difference.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I spent 4 years working for Google in Europe, and there was a similar conversation around the promotion rate for European Googlers versus American Googlers,
Mm,
with the European number being a little bit lower.
mm,
And one of the leads in the office years ago put together this deck about the cultural differences and how some European employees would maybe undersell their accomplishments. And they had like a side by side, like, well, here's how a German Googler would describe this
yeah,
project launch. And this is how like a Mountain View Googler would
yeah,
describe this launch. And they would be, quite different.
yes,
One would be very, oh my God, we did this. It was the
yeah,
best ever, launched
yeah,
these things. And then, the other one would be much more understated.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing how that cultural nuance can
It's
make the
huge.
difference, right?
It's huge. Yeah, if you're not willing to self promote, no one's going to know that you are doing anything important. I mean, you
Yeah.
literally sell yourself at all times. So
And many of us were raised to look at self-promotion as not a good thing,
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword. We want to be humble, but at the same time, if you're humble all the time, you don't take credit for your work. Someone else can take credit for it. So I'm always out there telling people, take credit for your work. Make sure people know what you're doing, and give credit to people who are, to help them as well. Because I think some people just aren't wired to take credit or to promote them, be self-promotional. But I think you can also help them out by doing that as well, and that builds trust and loyalty as well. So I mean, there's reasons to do that for in general, but I think that's something that we're not great at, is because we shy away from that because we were
Mhm.
raised not to be boastful, but that's how the game is played.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious, do you think, let's call it, um, sort of the next generation of East Asian Americans? Like, so my parents immigrated from Hong Kong. I was born in New Jersey.
Mm,
But my kids were born in Seattle, and they're pretty, assimilated.
yeah.
I'm curious, like, do you think that next generation will be able to navigate this a little bit more effectively than, the Gen Xers?
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, I think we were ingrained with the immigrant scarcity mindset because our parents came over here with nothing and they had to
Mhm.
sacrifice everything, and they reminded us that they sacrificed everything, and so we
Yeah.
felt guilt. I don't feel like our kids feel guilt about anything. So
Yeah.
um,
They need a little more of guilt in
a
my
little
opinion.
more guilt. Yeah, we always oh, you're too coddled, but we're the ones coddling them. So, but I think there's also we weren't accustomed to getting positive reinforcement from our. I mean,
Yeah.
most of us did not, because it's like you got an A, but that was expected of you. Like you don't get a trophy for that or award for that.
Yeah.
There's no participation trophies for being getting best student because that was your job, and so we never got any of that encouragement. Whereas with my kids, I'm very different. Definitely still try to discipline them, but also I have more positive reinforcement. But I think that confidence building is really important.
Mhm.
I think for a lot of us, we had to build our own confidence,
Yeah.
and I think the positive side is that we built a lot of grit, and so we were able to endure a lot of like pain and suffering to get to where we are. But at the same time, the cost of that is, we were always afraid to take risks or fail because it was frowned upon. So we didn't even make mistakes. You didn't try to you know try to go for that goal, try to reach for that promotion, try to start that company, it was kind of frowned upon to take those risks because we were raised with all about getting security and making sure we had enough financial security to take care of our families, and that was all that mattered. And so I think with that scarcity mindset, we reach way lower than we would have if we actually had someone encourage us. So for my kids and I think a lot of our next generation, we're able to give them more of that freedom to reach for higher goals, and that's kind of the more Western, kind of American individualistic, you know, in kind of culture that our kids are going to be raised in. Is very, we grew up in that, but we also had Hong Kong and Taiwan like culture from our parents imbued upon us at home. So I think it should be a lot more different for the kids I meet now, from like my friends' kids and everyone else. Like they are much more bold and more confident, and they're going after careers that I wouldn't have even been able to consider, directing movies or being a journalist or, being whatever it might be. But I think to me, that's a sign that it's like, okay, these kids are going to be able to be themselves and do what they want to do. So I think that's a big step.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm also optimistic. The only hesitance I have around the next generation, just speaking for my kids, is they definitely don't seem to have that eye of the tiger that like I had. And on the one hand, I'm grateful because that was kind of a stressful way to grow up, thinking like, oh, I have to hit these achievements. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm like, well, you guys are really comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you look at who's running most of the places in the country, they were all kids that grew up comfortable. And so I'm not too worried about that. I think at the end of the day, they got in for other reasons, not because of the IQ, but mostly because of the EQ or because of network. And so I'm a firm believer, like people who are paying for crazy amounts of money for consulting, for college consultants, and paying for Photoshop to get their kids into school and cheating or whatever. I'm like, I mean, that's all well and good, but I don't know that when my kids are old enough to go to college, I don't know that college will matter as much even. I mean, a lot of it is the ego of the parents. And so at the end of the day, like I know a lot of people, a lot of people will probably get our kids jobs and they'll be fine. They want, want them to have a great college experience, but I feel like, I think that pressure, that added pressure is, that's, if they're not driven internally, it's like if I want my kid to be the best golfer in the world, but he doesn't want to golf, and I force him to go every day, he will never get there. Like I want my kids to actually want to do and have this drive themselves to go do what they want to do, not be forced into something and just because I want them to do it. And I feel like that was a difference. Like, I mean, I don't know that I would have done finance as a major if it weren't for my parents making me choose business or some kind of career, like professional career. I would have gone to liberal arts and like study philosophy or like, something more interesting than doing, T accounts, like accounting projects and this, and that, like MPV. Like, I was like, oh gosh. So for me, I think I want my kids to explore and learn and just become well-rounded, because as I've written before, I think being a good storyteller is more important than anything. It's a gift that is so important for sales, relationship building, anything like, and that is a kind of a left brain thing, not just a right brain. So
yeah, this has been great. I did want to ask you one last topic before we move on and wrap it up, Dave. I'm curious, one of the things I've noticed over the years is there's a growing consensus in America that China is the country's biggest adversary. And as a person of, Chinese ethnicity, as an American, but someone with Chinese ethnicity, sometimes I wonder, like, oh man, is this going to create a hostile environment for some of us over here? I was curious, like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it already has, right? I mean, you see kind of the anti-China sentiment and leading to, hate crime, anti-Asian hate crimes. I think there's things talking about like COVID and, that being from China and some lab, and kind of a lot of all the misinformation out there that goes around, that you see all these professors that were like the the Trump initiative to go after all these Chinese professors and ruin their lives, even though they were innocent. I mean, these are just immigrants who came over wanting a better life, and they were accused of spying when they had no proof. And then they were fired from their jobs, and then they were found innocent, but the damage was already done. And these folks don't care. They ruin people's lives. They're like, oh well, sorry, our bad. But I think this is ongoing sentiment that's being spread, whether it be from TikTok or from tariffs and this and that. It's like, okay, well, China is our enemy, even though they're like frenemies, because we're still sell stuff to them. They still sell stuff to us, and it's kind of this weird. I think a lot of it is China closed its doors on the world, and they're trying to stay as isolated as they can, but we still need a lot of stuff to be manufactured from there, and we're moving it out of China. But like there's a coexistence that has to happen no matter what, because I mean we both are producers and takers of things that, and the both richest countries, we need each other, and I don't know how it necessarily gets better, but the antagonism between both sides is definitely not helping, and that's going to trickle down to a lot of us, and not even just people that are actually Han Chinese, but people who are like Asian in general, because those people don't care. If they're racist, they don't care. And so I think it's scary times. People will be questioned. Japanese internment happened, and who knows what happens. Things are happening in the past few months that we didn't think could happen, and so it's a slippery slope. So there are scary times, but for me, the way I'm fighting back is like, with more stories being told in film, getting more people in Capitol Hill elected that look like us, that can fight for us, bringing together kind of influential, powerful people to help out and lift up the community in general. But these are the things that I think for our kids' sake we have to do, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. And so I'm not saying that we're going to be in World War III anytime soon, but the world is pretty unstable right now, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, I agree, and I tend to take the same view that what we can do is let's lean in and participate and contribute and help people kind of see all of the kind of diversity of the Asian American community, and I think the last thing we can do or should do is just kind of like stay quiet and keep our head out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's the same as if you in a fight with a bully and you do nothing, they'll just keep bullying you. So you have to punch them. So,
Dave, how can people stay connected with you? I love your stuff on LinkedIn. Are there other ways that people can kind of praise of what you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I also have a Substack, is davelue.com. I just write every now and again. I write essays about different topics that I feel like affect a lot of the Asian American professional community, whether it be the immigrant scarcity mindset, or not being the NPC, becoming a better storyteller, how to gain power. But these are things that we don't often think about, but I write them in the context of an Asian American perspective. And so, yeah, davelue.com. And, I do post, like you said, Tom, on LinkedIn. So feel free to follow me there. I like to share data that a lot of people don't know about, and then, tie a story around it and explain why it's important and relevant. And I think that's why a lot of people follow. So, I'll keep doing that as long as I can. And then, if you're a founder, Asian American founder, please reach out, hyphencap.com, and would love to see if I can help you out.
I love it, Dave. Thank you so much for coming by, and look forward to continuing the convo in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
You bet. Take care. Bye. All right. That was Dave Liu. What a great guy, right? Sometimes you talk to people and you just kind of get the sense of like, this is a trustworthy dude. Dave gives me that impression. And so if you are a Asian American founder, hit him up. He's always willing to help. Maybe he can write a check, but even if he can't, he can give you great advice. He's been around the block, is super connected. I think the other thing, my takeaway from our conversation is, the importance of understanding how the game works. And for a lot of folks who grew up from, raised from parents who came from East Asia, a lot of those Confucian values are really important, like filial piety, things like that. But some of them don't really adapt well to the modern kind of capitalist system where you really do have to advocate for yourself. And you do have to give yourself a lot of luck surface area. You can't just put your head down, do what your manager tells you, and assume you're naturally going to just move up in the world. That will work up to a point, but at some point you got to really go for it and take risks and put yourself out there. I think the other thing that Dave was alluding to that I definitely agree with is some of the interpersonal skills, the storytelling skills, the communication skills. And unfortunately, those are not often taught. Or if they are, some of us don't pay attention in those classes. But let me tell you, those soft skills are incredibly valuable. And I'll share one last anecdote before I wrap up. So I was actually just yesterday finalizing my son's senior year of high school course selection. And here's the messed up thing with the system. There's actually a class around leadership and communications. And I was like, oh man, that is an incredible class. You should take that class. And at the same time, we're like, well, next year you're applying to college. That's not an AP class. And your interests are primarily in STEM. So you need to load up on, AP, bio, calculus, physics, blah, blah, blah. And we ran out of slots. And so I don't know. I don't think he's going to be able to take that comms and leadership class. But this whole college system would penalize him for doing that because he would have one less AP. It wouldn't kind of have this spiky story. So, a long way of saying if you're a parent, help your kid with those soft skills. And if you're a young professional, I have great news for you. I recently took a class at Stanford Continuing Studies modeled after the famous GSB class, Touchy-Feely, Interpersonal Dynamics, I think is the official name. But I loved it. It was a real game changer if you kind of go into it with an open mind and invest time into reflecting. And so, it's never too late to kind of upgrade your soft skills, your communication skills, and also your self-awareness. And just also, maybe that's one thing that Dave and I didn't have time to touch into, but we weren't raised, and I don't know if this is unique to East Asian culture, but many of us were not raised with any acknowledgement of your feelings and how you feel and why you feel certain ways. But if you don't really master that and understand it, your ability to lead and have difficult conversations and make difficult decisions at work will really be affected. So something to think about. If you like this kind of conversation, don't forget to subscribe, follow me. I will also post a summary of my convo with Dave on my Substack, firesidepm.substack.com. And if you are in need of a PM kind of expert coach, you can hit me up. And lately I've been doing a lot of consulting projects for some companies that are trying to make a big product strategy decision or upgrade how they're managing their product management function. So always up for fun projects like that. And if you are a founder, pre-seed, and you're looking for advice, maybe a small check, hit me up as well. Happy to learn more and see how I can be helpful to you. And then maybe we can go for the seed round with old Dave. All right. Let's get back to work. Hopefully this was useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye, team.